Just a quick introduction. My name is Emad Younis. I'm a product line manager here at VMware. Right now I'm covering vCenter server lifecycle for on-premises, VMware Cloud, AWS, and Edge. So let's jump right to it. If you're familiar with the on-prem version of vSphere, for vCenter, if you want to connect multiple vCenters and be able to manage them from one management view, we have what's called enhanced link mode. And previously, you would need an external PSC deployment to do that. Now, recently, we've gone to a more simplified deployment model, and now you can use the embedded deployment of vCenter to establish that connectivity as well. But with the on-prem version, we're doing a little bit of, we're doing some different things, right? So what we're doing is we're replicating things across the vSphere SSO domain. And all the vCenters in that SSO domain have to be within the same domain, right? We can't mix and match. They have to be within the same vSphere SSO domain. Now, we are replicating things like tags and categories, roles and permissions, certificates, things like that are coming across the SSO domain. Now, with VMware Cloud on AWS, we also have an SSO domain. And as you probably heard earlier on today, there is a restrictive permissions model, right? So how do we view and manage two different environments and retain that separation? And that's where hybrid link mode comes into play. So with hybrid link mode, what we're doing is we're providing the ability to bring together two separate SSO domains, which is vSphere.local on-prem traditionally, and within VMware Cloud on AWS, it's vmc.local. So now we're bringing together those two SSO domains, but we're able to retain that separation of permissions. So you have the administrator at vSphere.local, or whatever groups that you've added that have those admin rights, they still retain those rights on-prem. But on the VMware Cloud AWS side, you have that cloud admin, or anybody who has those rights will still have the same permissions. So they'll be able to do what they need to do on the on-prem side, but when it comes to the cloud side, they're still restricted. So as you can see here from the image, up at the top, we have the VMware Cloud AWS SDDC, so that's the vCenter server managing it. But then right below it, we also have the vCenter that's on-prem. So the other thing that we have is typically when HLM was first introduced, we were doing it from the cloud down to on-prem. So that was the only way to configure it. Here recently, we have what's called the Cloud Gateway. And the Cloud Gateway gives us a little bit more flexibility because we deploy it in our on-premises data center. And then, based off that, we can now manage from the on-prem data center up to VMware Cloud on AWS, whereas before, it was the opposite direction. Now, as part of HLM, we are doing a unidirectional trust. So we're basically trusting from the on-prem side to VMware Cloud on AWS. And basically, for the gateway, we're only opening up the outbound ports. Whereas before, from VMware Cloud on AWS, to establish HLM, you had to do connection to the identity source. So in this case, it would be Active Directory. And at the same time, you would have to have access to the vCenter server open ports on-prem. The gateway does not require AD to be added as an identity source either, whereas from the cloud side, it did require access to the identity source. So if you want, you can actually add users to the cloud admins group within VMware Cloud on AWS. So as you can see here, I have my on-premises data center, which consists of a vCenter server. I have storage, doesn't matter what storage. Also have hosts as well as network. Network could be either a distributed switch or a regular standard virtual switch. Now on the VMware Cloud on AWS side, again, should look familiar because same management plane that I have on-prem, which is vCenter, now I have also in the cloud. As far as storage goes, we're leveraging vSAN For network, we're doing NSX, but again, you don't need to have NSX on-prem for this. You can, again, mix and match. And we're also leveraging, AWS services as well. So for HLM, what winds up happening is we're connecting the two vCenters, and it allows us to migrate VMs from on-prem and back. So there's no restriction whatsoever. So it makes it that easy. So you can actually right-click and say, I want to vMotion a VM like you do today. Today, you typically do it from within a cluster or across clusters. Now we can do it from on-prem to the cloud, that easy. The beauty of this is we're leveraging the same technology that we're used to on-prem. So all that skill sets you have as a VI admin, they translate simply into the cloud. No problems there. As far as moving workloads, we have different options. One of them is VMware HCX, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. The other one is live migration, or vMotion. We have cold migration. Content library. Now, content library, it's not just, it's part of workload mobility in a sense of you can convert virtual machines and then move them from one place to another, but you have to convert them first. But it's also about retaining the same content that I leverage on-prem, and I'm able to use it within the cloud. So your ISOs, your templates, your scripts, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can still use them whether on-prem or in the cloud. And then finally, you have enhanced vMotion compatibility, so EVC. And you have to keep in mind, as we're moving workloads from on-prem to the cloud, we need to be mindful of the CPU type, because that will determine how we move them. We may need to power them down so they can inherit those chipset functionality when they're moved, and then when we have to move them back. So there are reasons to use different workload mobility options depending on your SLAs as well. So how do we get the applications that we have from on-prem to the cloud? And there may be some things in place where we have to be mindful of, I don't want to refactor. I don't want downtime. So what are my options in doing that? Well, to do that, first we need to start thinking about, which workloads fit in what bucket. So we kind of bucketize the workloads, and in this example, we're doing downtime, low downtime, no downtime, right? So we'll start putting certain VMs in these particular buckets. And then we also have to be mindful of the dependencies. So you may have workloads that fall into downtime, but they have other dependencies that may fall into low downtime or no downtime. So then we kind of have to start thinking about, okay, does it make sense to just say that this app just needs no downtime because you have that one dependency that has that requirement? So there's things that you need to think about before just moving workloads. In the sense of workload migration, if we do downtime or no downtime, we have a couple of options. We can use cold migration, which requires downtime. And then we have live vMotion, which is no downtime. Now, in moving these workloads, there are some requirements that need to be in place to do so. So first of all, for the cold migration, you can either have a standard switch or a distributed switch, but it has to be either on 6.0 or 6.5, even 6.7 as well. Same thing for the vMotion, starts off at 6.0 or greater. But if you notice, you have to have VM compatibility version 9 for it to actually be able to do a live vMotion. The other thing is, you notice that there's IPsec VPN requirements, firewall needs to be configured, but here on the vMotion side, we require L2 VPN and Direct Connect. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that if a vMotion is happening, we want to make sure that it has the bandwidth it needs to actually complete that vMotion. Whereas with downtime, it's going to happen, but it's going to happen eventually, right? It's downtime required. But here we want that uptime in place.
So what configuration is required at the direct connect level to provide that functionality?
So you just need direct connect in place. That's all. At least that's our requirement. It just needs to be in place and configured, plus the L2 VPN configuration on the VMware Cloud on AWS side.
Got it.
So we kind of covered some of this, but just to kind of go over it a little bit more. Here, as you can see, we have a vCenter server, and all we're going to do is select the VM, and we're just going to right-click and say migrate. So it's the same migration wizard that you have today with vMotion. Nothing's changed. And if you're doing it in the opposite direction, so from cloud down, it's the same workflow. So nothing has changed. Again, those skill sets translate on both sides of the fence. As far as things you should be aware of is for live vMotion, you need a bandwidth of 250 megabits per second and a latency of 100 milliseconds round trip. Everything else we've kind of covered as well. Now for EVC, that's another consideration. So VMware Cloud on AWS leverages the Broadwell chipsets, whereas on-prem you could have a different kind of chipset. So making sure that EVC is in place is important, or you may have to bounce the servers, the VMs, as they come up to inherit the chipsets at some point. We also have cold migration, so zero downtime. And again, same workflow. The only difference here is the virtual machine needs to be powered off in order to initiate a cold migration versus a live migration requires the virtual machine to be powered on. The other thing here is that the right now minimum of 6.0 update 3 needs to be in place or greater to be able to leverage this functionality. And then IPsec VPN to the management gateway within VMware Cloud on AWS. The other thing that we have is we have what's called low downtime using VMware HCX. Now again, we'll cover HCX in more detail, but HCX, think of it kind of like the Swiss Army knife of workload mobility because it's got a lot of functionality natively built in that you're able to do everything natively without having to do some of the configurations that we have to do for, let's say, vMotion or the cold or live. So we'll cover that here in a little bit. And this has actually changed a little bit since this slide because we talk about low downtime. HCX also has the capability to do no downtime as well. So let's jump into a demo for HLM real quick. Okay, so here we're logged into the VMware Cloud on AWS console. And for us to, we're going to look at the cloud gateway side. So for us to start this process, we're going to jump into the tools menu. And on the tools menu, you'll see that we have the ability to download the vCenter Cloud Gateway. So we're going to download we're going to go to the site. And from here, you're going to wind up selecting the VMware vCenter Cloud Gateway, and we're just going to download it. And once we have the ISO, we're going to mount it to one of our jump boxes or somewhere locally on our on-prem environment. Now, with the gateway, just like vCenter, you have a UI that you can use, or you can deploy this from the CLI as well. With the CLI, we have some JSON templates that you can leverage to deploy. So in this example, we'll go ahead and go through the UI. So since we're running on a Windows machine, we'll select the Win32 directory. We'll select the installer. And now we're greeted with a little cloud and a door letting us get started. It's a pretty neat graphic, sorry. So here we have 2 different stages. And just like the VCSA, you got stage 1, stage 2. The Cloud Gateway has something similar, where stage 1 is deploying the gateway and doing some configuration. And in stage 2 is actually configuring hybrid link mode. So again, just like if you've ever deployed a vCenter server on-prem, you should be familiar with this, this type of deployment model as well. So we're going through the EULA. We're providing the target, so if it's an ESXi or vCenter server as far as the management, give it the credentials of the target. We'll accept the certificate. And then we will provide a name for the appliance, the gateway appliance that we're deploying to, as well as the root credentials. We'll select the data store that the VMDKs will live on. And then finally, we'll enter in some of the IP information, DNS, and all that. Then we'll provide our NTP. Now here, this is where we're giving it the single sign-on information, and that's what it leverages to bring together these 2 different SSO domains. So here we're providing the on-prem SSO, and then it will connect with the vSphere.local SSO. We'll accept the certificate. And then finally, we have the option, if we want, to join the Cloud Gateway to the Active Directory domain, or we can choose not to. This is optional. Again, I can, if I have a group in here, I can later on add it in, or I can just use the local group. So in this case, we are actually going to leverage it. And now it starts to go out and deploys the gateway to the target vCenter server that we have on-prem.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Are there any on-prem topology requirements for the PSC? Are you required to have the vCenter and PSC, combined, or is an external PSC supported?
So when we first started out, from the cloud side down, that was a requirement to have an external deployment. But now that we've started supporting the embedded deployment model, you can leverage either one.
Thank you.
Yep. So our recommendation, by the way, is the embedded deployment model. Keep it simple. Okay, so now that we've deployed our Cloud Gateway, the next step is we want to configure hybrid link mode. So we're just going to click Start. And we got a little bit of information on what hybrid link mode is. The next step is we'll provide the cloud vCenter server information, so the FQDN, the username, which here's the cloud admin, and the password. Then here, what we're going to do is, since we've added our identity source, which was Active Directory, we'll be able to select one of our groups. So here we got our cpbu.corp group, or our identity source, sorry, and then from there we'll be able to select our group, which is our VMC admins. Now anybody in this VMC admins group now will be able to log in from the on-prem side and be able to manage both sides of the fence, but will still retain that separation of permissions.
Sorry, presumably that's a what sort of role is that being added to, or what privileges is that being given in the cloud version of vCenter? So do I still get the normal RBAC and privileges and role-based control in the cloud vCenter?
Yeah, you do not. So what winds up happening is those VMC admins, let's say that if they're on-prem, they have full admin rights. They could do everything. Whereas once we've done hybrid link mode, they have basically cloud admin rights, so power user rights restricted. So even though they're full admin on-prem, they're restricted in the cloud.
But then can I create lower privilege roles or specific roles in vCenter in the cloud as I would on-prem for other types of
So like read-only and things like that?
Yeah. Okay.
So once this is done, we're going to launch the vSphere client, which is also part of the Cloud Gateway. So we'll log in. And now, as you can see, after we're logged in, we can see both our vCenter server in the cloud, as well as we have 2 vCenters that were on-prem using enhanced link mode. So now I can manage all 3. And with my account, like I said, on-prem, I have full admin rights, whereas in the cloud side, I have a bit of restriction of what I can do. But we're bringing together these separate SSO domains. At the same time, we're also keeping that restriction of permissions. The good thing about HLM versus ELM is that with HLM, I can actually enable it or disable it at will. Whereas with enhanced link mode, ELM, it's kind of only happening during deployment. So as I add vCenters together, it just happens magically as part of the SSO domain. Whereas with hybrid link mode, I can disable and re-enable. And then once you come in here, there is a section. Sorry, I didn't create this demo. So link domains. So from the on-prem side, you will see the linked domains that you have, as well as there's linked vCenters. So you'll be able to see all the vCenters that are linked as well from a view. So again, now I can manage my entire environment from a single view while retaining the separation of permissions and 2 separate SSO domains.
Is there a specific reason why you have to deploy that gateway appliance, and this capability isn't just included in vCenter to be able to connect with hybrid link mode?
Yeah, so we went with the gateway approach because a couple of reasons. A, this gives more flexibility on-prem to be able to, all you need is the outbound connection, right? The other reason is that the gateway is updated automatically from the cloud down. So now we can push updates down without affecting your on-prem vCenter, right? Because we don't want to touch your on-prem vCenter, right? That's your baby. We want to be able to provide all the latest and greatest functionality, right, while retaining that separation. So the gateway gives us that flexibility.
So that makes sense. But would that mean then that because you've got some backwards compatibility between the kind of version you're running in VMC on AWS and what I've got on-prem, if I log in on-prem and I'm sort of a version behind or something, I might not see the capabilities in the VMC on AWS, but that's where I'd have to log into the gateway and then I'd see those pieces. Exactly,
yeah. Okay. The Cloud Gateway gives you some more visibility into that functionality from logging into that vSphere client.
Or I could log into the vCenter in VMC on AWS and see my on-prem.
No, so that's the thing, right? So depending on how you want to manage HLM. So if you configure it from the cloud side, you have to log in from the cloud side to be able to manage. If you use the gateway, now you can log in on-prem through the gateway, and you can manage everything that way.
But I wouldn't see what I have on-prem.
You won't see the links. So to be able to see the connectivity, the links, you have to log in depending on where you've configured it. So that's the difference. Does that make sense, or?
Yeah. When you say links, what do you mean? Like
the link mode. So the ability to manage both my on-prem and my VMware Cloud AWS vCenter.
Yeah.
They're in hybrid link mode. So to be able to see that management view, depending where I configured hybrid link mode, is where I have to log in. So for example, if I deploy this gateway, that's where I'm going to log in. So I'll log in via the gateway H5 client, the vSphere client. That's what I'll use to be able, once I log in, I'll be able to see both on-prem and VMware Cloud AWS. If I log in just to VMware Cloud on AWS via the vSphere client, I won't see that view.
Okay, and if you log in on-prem directly to your vCenter on-prem, you won't see that?
You won't see that view. You have to log in through the vSphere.
So those two are 2 separate vCenters. They have no knowledge, but it's there. Okay.
Yep.
Have you had any ideas or thoughts about adding some kind of prompt or detection to say, this is in hybrid link mode, you shouldn't log in here, go back to here?
So as far as, sorry, maybe I missed.
If I log into the on-site vCenter, just a prompt, a messaging system says, I've detected it's enhanced link mode. You should probably log in here instead if you want to manage both. Because somebody's sometimes going to log into the wrong one and not realize, or somebody new comes along. It'd be nice to have some kind of a...
So there will be a distinction between the icon. So the VMware Cloud AWS SDDC icon will have a blue vCenter logo, and then the traditional vCenter icon will be there for the on-prem. So you'll be able to tell the difference between what's happening. They're signaling me. I guess I got 1 minute left. Okay. So last slide. I'm going through real quick. The last thing I want to kind of mention is you also have content library. And content library started out in vSphere 6.0. And now, starting with vSphere 6.7 Update 1, it now recognizes native VMTX templates, whereas before you would have to convert those native templates to an OVF to bring them in. Now it recognizes them by default. And with the release of vSphere 6.7 Update 2, which the bits dropped last night, we can actually replicate those templates as well. So again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can leverage the same ISOs that we have, the same scripts, the same templates from on-prem to the cloud.